The first time she slipped into my bed, her fingers were already tangled in my shirt like she was afraid I might disappear. It was after midnight. The hallway outside our apartments was quiet, just the low hum of the elevator, and the smell of someone's late dinner drifting through the vents. She knocked softly, twice, then once more. I remember checking the clock. 12:17 a.m. When I opened the door, she didn't say much. Just stepped inside, closed it behind her, and looked at me the way someone looks at a glass of water after walking in the heat too long. She told me she couldn't sleep. That was how it started. I'm 37. I work in commercial real estate downtown, mid-level management, nothing flashy. I've lived in that building in Seattle for almost 3 years. Same one-bedroom unit, same view of the parking lot, same quiet routine. I make coffee at 6:15 every morning. Gym twice a week. Microwave dinners more often than I should admit. My divorce finalized 2 years ago. No kids. No drama. Just quiet. Too quiet sometimes. She moved in across the hall last spring. Late 40s, maybe 50. I wasn't sure. She had that kind of presence that made guessing feel pointless. Always dressed well, heels clicking down the hallway, hair pulled back neat for work. She drove a black SUV and left early most mornings. The first few weeks, we only exchanged small nods. Elevator politeness. Weather comments. Then one evening, I heard raised voices through the wall. A man's voice. Angry, sharp. I didn't mean to listen, but it's hard not to when the walls are thin and someone's tone carries like that. He asked her if she thought she still had options. At her age. Silence after that. Then the sound of a door slamming. I stood in my kitchen holding a plate I wasn't even eating from anymore. I don't know why it bothered me so much. Maybe because of how quiet it went afterward. No yelling back. No defense. Just quiet. The next morning, I saw her in the hallway. No makeup. Sunglasses even though it was cloudy. She kept her eyes down. I asked if she was okay before I could stop myself. She paused. Just slightly. Then she smiled the kind of smile people use when they don't want questions. She said she was fine. I nodded like I believed her. But I didn't. A week later, I ran into her in the parking garage. She was standing beside her SUV, staring at her phone. Shoulders tight. I almost walked past. That's usually what I do. Stay out of things. Keep life simple. Then I remembered that voice. At her age. It stuck with me. I told her she'd drop something, even though she hadn't. I just needed a reason to stop. She looked confused for a second, then realized what I was doing. She pointed out that she hadn't dropped anything. I admitted I knew that. I just wanted to check. She studied me for a long moment. Like she was trying to decide if I was safe. She finally told me that her husband traveled for work. That he got tense. That was the first time she told me she was married. I felt something shift in my chest. Not jealousy. Not even disappointment. Just a small reminder to stay in my lane. I said quietly that people shouldn't talk like that. She let out a breath. A real one this time. She asked if I'd heard that. I admitted it was hard not to. She didn't look embarrassed. Just tired. She explained that he thought she should be grateful. Grateful he still wanted her. The way she said it, flat and almost amused, made it worse. I didn't know what to say. I'm not good with speeches. I'm good with leases and contracts and spreadsheets. Not this. I told her he was wrong. She looked at me then. Really looked. Like she was weighing those words. She said I didn't even know her. I replied that I knew enough. There was a long pause. Cars pulling in and out of the garage. The smell of gasoline. Cold concrete air. She stepped a little closer. She asked if I lived alone. I confirmed I did. She remarked that it must be peaceful. I said sometimes. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, around midnight, she knocked for the first time. She said she couldn't sleep. Said her husband was in Chicago for a week. Said she hated being alone in the apartment when it was too quiet. We sat on my couch at first. Talking about nothing. Work stress. The building's terrible water pressure. The coffee shop down the street. She told me she worked in marketing. That younger women in her office joked about retiring gracefully. That clients assumed she was the assistant sometimes. She explained that they looked past her. Like she was already fading. I didn't know how to tell her that when she walked into a room, no one faded. She sat closer as the minutes passed, her knee brushing mine. Not by accident. I could feel the heat of her skin through the thin fabric of my sweatpants. She said softly that she hadn't felt wanted in a long time. It wasn't seductive. It was honest. I should have stepped back. I knew that. Married woman. Across the hall. Complicated. But when she reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. Her fingers were warm. Slightly trembling. She told me I didn't have to fix her. She just didn't want to feel invisible tonight. There are moments when you know you're crossing a line, and you still keep walking. I told myself it was comfort. That she needed kindness. That I was just being there for someone who'd been spoken to like she was already past her worth. When she leaned in and kissed me, it wasn't rushed. It was slow. Searching. Like she was trying to remember something she used to know. And when we moved to the bedroom, it didn't feel like a wild affair. It felt quiet. Almost careful. Her hands on my chest. My fingers brushing her hair away from her face. The way she closed her eyes when I touched her like she hadn't been touched gently in a long time. Afterward, she lay with her head against my shoulder, tracing small circles on my skin. She murmured that I was different. I believed her. That might have been my first mistake. By the time October came, her husband was traveling more often, and her midnight knocks became routine. I told myself we were two lonely people finding comfort. I didn't yet understand that loneliness doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. And I definitely didn't understand what it would cost me. The second time she came over, she didn't knock softly. She knocked like she knew I would open the door. It was 3 nights after the first time. I had told myself I needed to set boundaries. That I would be calm. Clear. Mature about it. Instead, when I opened the door and saw her standing there in loose sweatpants and a thin gray sweater, hair down this time, I forgot every speech I had prepared. She asked if she could come in. She didn't look upset. Just certain. I stepped aside. We didn't go straight to the bedroom that night. We sat at my small kitchen table. I poured her a glass of red wine. She didn't drink much of it. She asked if I regretted it. Her voice was steady, but she didn't look at me when she said it. I took a second before answering. I told her no. She nodded once, like she had expected that. She said she didn't either. There was a pause. The kind where something important is hovering, waiting to be said. I added a but. She let out a soft breath. She remarked that there was always a but. I pointed out that she was married. She finally looked at me. Not defensive. Not ashamed. Just tired. She explained that he was gone more than he was home. And when he was home, he wasn't really there. I said that didn't make this simple. She agreed she hadn't said it was simple. She leaned back in her chair, studying me the way she had in the garage that first day. She called me a good man. Said that was what made this dangerous. I almost laughed at that. No one had called me dangerous before. She continued, saying she wasn't trying to take anything from me. She just needed to feel alive sometimes. The word stayed with me. Need to feel alive. It sounded honest. And it sounded temporary. Over the next 2 weeks, her visits became more regular. Sometimes she texted first. A simple question asking if I was awake at 11:48 p.m. Or mentioning that he was flying out tomorrow. The first time she texted during the day surprised me. She asked how work was going. I stared at the message longer than I should have. It felt different. Less physical. More personal. I replied that I was busy with quarter-end reports. She sent back a comment that I always sounded so responsible. I didn't know if that was a compliment. One evening, she came over earlier than usual. Around 9. I had just finished dinner. She sat on the couch, legs tucked under her, watching me move around the kitchen. She observed that I didn't rush. I asked what she meant. She clarified anything. I shrugged and said there was no reason to. She smiled softly and remarked that it was rare. We talked longer that night. About her job. About how younger colleagues called her ma'am in meetings. About clients who asked if she was still handling the account. She repeated the word still, shaking her head. Like she was about to be replaced. I told her she wasn't. She said I didn't know that. I replied that I knew how she carried herself. She asked how that was. I explained, like someone who built something. Like someone who knows what she's doing. Her expression changed then. Not flirtatious. Not playful. Something quieter. She said no one said that anymore. She reached for my hand, but this time it wasn't urgent. It wasn't about heat or escape. She just held it between both of hers, like she was warming her fingers. I realized something then. I wasn't just a man in her bed. I was the man who listened. And I liked that more than I should have. By the end of the month, we had a rhythm. She'd knock or text. I'd open the door. Sometimes we'd talk first. Sometimes we wouldn't. But small things started to shift. She began staying a little longer in the mornings when her husband was out of town. Sitting at my kitchen counter while I made coffee. She commented once that I always measured it exactly, watching me scoop grounds. I said it tasted better that way. She observed that I liked control. I admitted maybe. She studied me over the rim of her mug and remarked that I'd make a good husband. The words landed heavier than she meant them to, I think. I tried to keep my tone light, pointing out I'd already tried that. She said quickly that it was her loss. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't ask if she believed that about her own situation. One Friday night, she didn't text. I told myself that was good. Healthy. Necessary. Around 1 a.m. I heard laughter through the wall. A man's voice. Her husband must have been home. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling longer than I want to admit. The next morning, I saw her in the hallway. Sunglasses again. She commented casually that I'd disappeared. I said she was busy. She tilted her head slightly and asked if I was jealous. I said no. She stepped closer. She said good. That this wasn't about that. That was the first time something inside me tightened. This isn't about that. That night, she came over again. Urgent this time. Her kisses deeper. Hands moving with purpose. Like she was trying to erase something. Afterward, when we were lying there in the dark, I traced my fingers along her arm. I asked before I could stop myself if she ever thought about more. She asked more how? I clarified us outside this. She went still for a second. Then she rolled onto her side, propping her head up on her hand. She called me sweet. It wasn't an answer. I said I was serious. She acknowledged that she knew I was. She brushed her thumb over my cheek, almost tender. She said I thought this was building towards something. I asked if it wasn't. She didn't respond right away. I could feel the distance already, even though her body was still close. She said finally that she couldn't leave her life. Not over feelings. The word felt small when she said it. I asked what this was then. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She explained it was what she needed right now. Not what we need. What I need. I nodded like I understood. Like I was mature enough to handle that. But something shifted in me that night. For her, I was escape. Proof she was still wanted. Still powerful. Still desired. For me, she was something else. I just hadn't admitted how much yet. By November, I stopped pretending this was casual. It didn't feel casual when I started checking my phone at night, waiting for her name to light up the screen. It didn't feel casual when I noticed the pattern of her husband's travel schedule before she even told me. Chicago meant 4 nights. Dallas meant 2. San Francisco usually meant a full week. 2 weeks later, she started coming over without texting first. Just a soft knock. Like we had an understanding. We built small routines without talking about them. She liked the lamp by my bed turned on, not the overhead light. She preferred my side of the couch because it faced the window. She would kick off her shoes in the same spot by the door. After a month of this, it felt less like an affair and more like a second life. We talked more than we touched, sometimes. She told me stories about her early career. About being the only woman in meetings where men called her sweetheart. About staying late to prove she deserved a seat at the table. She said one night, sitting cross-legged on my bed, that she used to be sharp. Now she felt like she was constantly defending herself. Like she was on borrowed time. I told her she still was sharp. She smiled, but it faded quickly. She said at work maybe. At home, she was just convenient. I hated that word. Convenient. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it, but her eyes drifted to the ceiling. By December, I started cooking for her when I knew her husband was away. Nothing impressive. Pasta. Stir-fry. Once, I tried salmon and overcooked it. She laughed at that. A real laugh. She told me I was trying too hard. I said I didn't mind trying. She watched me quietly for a second and remarked that was what made me different. I wanted to ask different from who? But I already knew. There were nights we barely made it past the door before we were wrapped up in each other. Her hands pulling at my shirt. My mouth at her neck. That urgency never faded. But something else grew alongside it. Comfort. She started leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom drawer. Not openly. Just tucked behind my shaving kit. The first time I noticed it, I felt something steady settle in my chest. 6 weeks after that first knock, she stayed over until morning. Really stayed. Not slipping out before dawn. Not checking the hallway like we were teenagers. We lay in bed watching pale winter light creep across the ceiling. She observed that I was quiet. I said I was just thinking. She called that dangerous. I admitted it was about us. She turned onto her side, facing me. Her hair was messy, softer without the careful styling she wore during the day. She told me gently not to. I asked not to what? She said not to turn this into something heavier than it was. It was the first time I felt the gap clearly. For me, the quiet mornings meant something. For her, they were just extended nights. By January, I realized I was rearranging my schedule around hers. Leaving work early on days I knew she'd be alone. Skipping drinks with coworkers because I didn't want to miss her text. That wasn't casual. One night, after she had left, I heard her door close across the hall. A few minutes later, I heard her husband's voice through the wall. Calm this time. Almost cheerful. I sat on my couch in the dark. I started to understand something uncomfortable. She was different with him. Lighter maybe? Polished. With me, she was undone. Raw. But undone doesn't always mean chosen. By February, she began talking about work more intensely. A younger executive had been promoted over her. She told me, pacing my living room, that they said they wanted fresh energy. Fresh. I pointed out she'd been there longer than anyone. She said exactly. She stopped pacing and looked at me. She explained that I made her feel like she was still powerful. The word hung in the air. Powerful. I didn't realize until that moment how much that mattered to her. Later that night, when she kissed me, it felt different. Less about comfort. More about proving something. Her grip firmer. Her movements deliberate. Like she was claiming something. Or claiming herself. 2 weeks after that, something happened that shifted everything. I came home early from work. A deal had fallen through, and I wasn't in the mood to sit at my desk pretending to be busy. As I walked down the hallway toward my apartment, I heard her voice. Through her open door. Laughing. I slowed without meaning to. Her husband stood inside, suitcase open on the floor. He had one hand on her waist. He told her she worried too much. That she wasn't going anywhere. She laughed again. Soft. Almost shy. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It looked normal. I stood there for a second too long. She glanced toward the hallway and saw me. Her expression changed. Just slightly. Not guilt. Not panic. Just awareness. Later that night, she knocked on my door. She said before I could ask anything that he was leaving tomorrow. I stepped aside and let her in. But something had shifted. As we lay in bed, her head resting on my chest, I finally asked the question I'd been holding back. I asked if she loved him. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers traced lazy lines over my stomach. She said it was complicated. I pointed out that wasn't an answer. She lifted her head and looked at me, serious now. She explained that love wasn't always enough. Sometimes it was just history. I asked what we were then. She studied my face carefully. She said we were real? The word should have comforted me. Instead, it unsettled me. Because real can mean a lot of things. By March, I knew I was in deeper than she was. I wasn't just waiting for her husband's flights anymore. I was imagining a future that didn't include him at all. And I had the growing suspicion that for her, this was still about what I gave her in the moment. Validation. Desire. Escape. I started to see the pattern clearly. Whenever she felt dismissed at work, she came to me. Whenever her husband made a comment about her age or her changing priorities, she ended up in my bed. When she felt strong and secure, she didn't need me as much. That realization didn't come all at once. It built slowly. In the gaps between her texts. In the nights she chose to stay home instead. One evening, She didn't answer my message at all. No explanation. No follow-up. I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone, realizing something simple and painful. I had become the thing she reached for when she felt small. And I wasn't sure she would ever reach for me when she felt whole. The night everything broke open, it wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming. No slammed doors. Just silence. It was late April. Rain tapping softly against the windows. I had texted her around 10. No answer. By 11:30, I stopped pretending I wasn't waiting. At 12:06 a.m., she knocked. When I opened the door, she didn't walk in right away. She just stood there. Eyes tired. Makeup smudged like she'd rubbed at it too many times. She asked if she could stay. Her voice wasn't urgent this time. It was fragile. I stepped aside. We didn't touch at first. She sat on the couch, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. I brought her water instead of wine. I asked what happened. She stared at the floor. She said quietly that he told her she should consider stepping back from work. Said maybe it was time she slowed down gracefully. I felt my jaw tighten. She continued, explaining he said clients responded better to younger faces. That maybe she should mentor instead of lead. I asked what she thought. She gave a small, hollow laugh. She pointed out she'd built half of that department. The room felt heavy. I sat beside her, close but not touching. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Just worn down. She said she was so tired of proving she still mattered. I replied that she did matter. She shook her head slightly and asked, to who? The question hung there between us. I reached for her hand. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers curled into mine like they'd been waiting. I said to me. It came out before I could filter it. Simple. Unpolished. Honest. She looked at me then. Really looked. She told me softly I shouldn't. I asked why. She said because this wasn't my fight. I replied it felt like it was. Her eyes filled, but she blinked it back quickly. We moved to the bedroom slowly. Not with the usual urgency. There was no hunger to prove anything. No rush. When she kissed me, it was different. Softer. Almost searching for reassurance instead of escape. I held her like I was afraid she might disappear. Later, lying in the dim light from the hallway, she traced her fingers across my chest absent-mindedly. She said I made her feel steady. I answered without thinking that she made me feel chosen. The words landed heavy. She stopped moving. She repeated the word chosen. I swallowed. I acknowledged that I knew what this started as. I wasn't stupid. But it didn't feel like just that anymore. She sat up slowly, pulling the sheet around herself. Not defensive. Just serious. She observed that I was getting attached. I admitted I already was. The rain outside grew louder. Or maybe it just felt that way. She said she couldn't give me a future. That I knew that. I challenged whether she really knew that. She reminded me she was married. I asked if she was happy. She didn't answer. She said after a moment that it wasn't the same as love. History counted for something. I countered that so did the present. She looked at me like I'd stepped somewhere dangerous. She said quietly that I was asking her to burn down her life. I clarified I was asking what we were. She stood up, walked to the window, wrapped in the sheet. Her back to me. She said again we were real? I told her that wasn't enough. Silence. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. I told her I was in love with her. There it was. No poetry. No dramatic speech. Just the truth sitting between us. She didn't turn around right away. When she finally did, her face had changed. Not angry. Not shocked. Just scared. She said I didn't get to do that. I asked do what? She replied, fall in love with her like she was free? I said I didn't plan it. She walked back toward the bed slowly. She pointed out that I was 37. That I had time. I could have something clean. Something simple. I said I didn't want simple. She studied me for a long moment. She said softly that I thought this was romantic. But it was messy. I acknowledged I knew that. She added that I'd lose respect if people knew. I said I didn't care. She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. She remarked that I said that now. I insisted I meant it. She sat beside me again, close enough that our shoulders touched. She admitted she didn't come here looking for love. She came here because she felt invisible. I made her feel seen. I said she was seen. She replied that was different than building a whole new life. I reached for her face gently, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I clarified I wasn't asking for tomorrow. I was asking if what she felt was real. She closed her eyes briefly. She whispered that it was. The room went still. She continued, saying she cared about me. More than she meant to. I asked her to choose me then. The words slipped out before I could soften them. She pulled back slightly. She said I didn't understand what that cost. I asked her to help me understand then. She stood up again, pacing now. She listed everything. Her family. Her reputation. Her career. People would say she left her husband for a younger neighbor because she was having some kind of crisis. I told her to let them. She insisted it wasn't that easy. I sat there, watching her struggle with something bigger than just us. I said quietly that I wouldn't beg. But I wouldn't pretend I was fine with this staying the same either. She stopped pacing. She accused me of changing the rules. I disagreed. I said I was telling the truth. She walked back to me slowly. She told me I deserved someone who was fully mine. I replied that I thought I had that. Her face softened at that. She leaned down and kissed me. Not urgent. Not hungry. Just long and deep and full of something heavier than desire. When she pulled away, her forehead rested against mine. She admitted she didn't know how to do this. I said neither did I. We stayed like that for a long time. No movement. Just breathing. For the first time, it wasn't about proving she was wanted. It wasn't about escape. It was about risk. And when she finally lay back down beside me, curling into my side like she was choosing it consciously, I felt both relief and fear settle in at the same time. Because once love is spoken out loud, it doesn't shrink back into something casual. It demands an answer. And I knew the next few weeks would decide everything. The first night she slept in my apartment without secrecy, it felt different. No quiet hallway checks. No waiting for flight schedules. Just her suitcase standing upright beside my dresser. It was early summer by then. Windows open. The city humming outside. She stood in my bedroom, looking around slowly. She remarked she never thought she'd start over at 49. I replied she wasn't starting over. She was continuing. She smiled at that. A small one. But real. The separation wasn't clean in an emotional sense, even if it was legally straightforward. There were phone calls. Papers. Conversations that lasted too long. Some nights she came home tense. Other nights she was strangely calm. She admitted one evening while folding her clothes into my drawers that she felt lighter. And guilty about feeling lighter. I said that made sense. She paused. She observed that I was steady. That I didn't panic. I told her I did panic. I just didn't perform it. That made her laugh. 2 months after she filed, she officially moved in. It wasn't romantic in a cinematic way. No dramatic moving truck. Just boxes carried across the hallway. Neighbors pretending not to watch. We set up small routines quickly. She took the left side of the closet. She liked the coffee stronger than I did. She rearranged my living room without asking, and somehow it looked better. Domestic life surprised me. She hummed while cooking. Left sticky notes on the fridge. Argued about which brand of laundry detergent was better. The intimacy shifted too. It wasn't rushed anymore. No urgency tied to someone else's schedule. No need to prove anything. One night, after a long day at work, she curled up beside me on the couch and just rested her head on my shoulder. She said we didn't have to rush anywhere. And for the first time, I believed that. Professionally, she didn't shrink. In fact, she did the opposite. By late August, she led a major campaign that outperformed projections. The same executives who had suggested she slow down gracefully suddenly praised her experience and strategic insight. She didn't gloat. She just came home, dropped her bag, and looked at me. She said she didn't fade? I answered no, she didn't. Around the same time, I closed one of the biggest deals of my career. A development contract that my supervisor had assumed would go to someone older. When it was announced in the office meeting, there was a noticeable shift in how people looked at me. Not just polite nods. Respect. That night, she poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to me. She pointed out that I was never the boring one. I insisted I was boring. She corrected me gently. She said I was reliable. There was a difference. Living together wasn't perfect. We argued about small things. She hated that I left lights on. I didn't love how she worked late into the night. But the fights were honest. No manipulation. No silence used as punishment. Just two adults learning each other. By October, people in the building stopped whispering. Time does that. It normalizes what once felt scandalous. One evening, as we were washing dishes, she looked at me thoughtfully. She asked if I regretted any of it. I said no. She asked if I regretted even the chaos. I said especially not the chaos. She dried her hands and stepped closer. She admitted she was scared I'd eventually resent her. I asked for what? She said for not choosing me sooner. I shook my head. I pointed out she had to choose herself first. That landed somewhere deep in her. We didn't talk about marriage right away. It wasn't urgent. We were building something steady, brick by brick. But the thoughts started creeping in quietly. One Saturday in November, we drove to the waterfront. Gray sky. Cold wind. She wore a long coat and tucked her hands into my jacket pockets to stay warm. She said, watching the water, that she used to think love at this age meant settling. I asked, and now? She replied, now it felt like arriving. I stopped walking. She turned to look at me. I asked, arriving where? She said, somewhere honest. I had planned nothing elaborate. No flash mob. No photographer hiding behind a bench. Just a small ring in my coat pocket that had been there for 2 weeks because I kept waiting for the right moment. Standing there, with her hair blowing across her face and her hands still tucked inside my jacket, I realized there wouldn't be a more honest one. I told her I didn't want her to arrive anywhere without me. She smiled, confused. I pulled the ring from my pocket. My hands weren't shaking the way I expected. I continued, explaining I wasn't asking because of age. Or because we went through something dramatic. I was asking because I liked our mornings. I liked our arguments about detergent. I liked that she didn't fade. Her eyes widened slightly. I said I wanted to keep choosing her. Every day. I asked if she would marry me. There was no dramatic gasp. She just stared at me for a second, then let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. She asked if I was serious. I said very. She looked down at the ring. Then back at me. She said yes. Not loud. Not theatrical. Just certain. When I slipped the ring onto her finger, she pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. She whispered into my coat that she didn't think she'd get this. I asked, get what? She replied, a second chance, without shrinking. I held her there for a long time. We weren't trying to prove anyone wrong anymore. We weren't escaping. We were choosing. And for the first time since that first midnight knock, the choice felt clean. We didn't plan a big wedding. Neither of us wanted spectacle. We'd already had noise, opinions, whispers. What we wanted was quiet. We got married in early spring. A small ceremony at a waterfront venue in Seattle, the kind of place with wide windows and wooden floors that creak a little when you walk. About 30 people. Close friends. A few coworkers who had stuck by her when things were messy. My sister. Her brother. No one who came to watch drama. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before her. She was still asleep, one arm thrown across my chest, hair spread out over the pillow. For a minute I just lay there, listening to her breathe. 2 years earlier, I had woken up alone almost every day. Coffee at 6:15. Silence. No one reaching for me. Now her ring caught the light on the nightstand. She stirred slightly. She asked sleepily what time it was. I said early. She asked if I was nervous. I admitted a little. She opened one eye and smiled. She said good. It meant I cared. We got ready separately, not because we had to, but because she said she liked the idea of seeing me at the end of the aisle for the first time. When I saw her walk in, I felt something settle in me. She wore a simple dress. Nothing flashy. Her hair down, soft around her shoulders. No attempt to look younger. No attempt to prove anything. Just herself. There had been a time when people told her she was past her prime. When clients asked if she was still handling the account. When her husband suggested she step back gracefully. Standing there, walking toward me with her shoulders straight and her chin lifted, she didn't look like someone stepping back from anything. She looked like someone stepping forward. The ceremony was short. Honest. We wrote our own vows. Not long speeches. Just real words. When it was my turn, I didn't look at the paper much. I said I met her when she was tired of being invisible. And I didn't realize then how much I was tired of being unnoticed too. She smiled slightly at that. I continued, explaining she taught me that steady wasn't boring. It was dependable. And she showed me that strength didn't fade with age. It deepened. I paused, letting myself breathe. I promised to keep choosing her. Even when it was inconvenient. Even when it was hard. Especially when it was quiet. When she spoke, her voice wavered at first, then steadied. She said I saw her before she saw herself. That I didn't rescue her. I reminded her she was still here. There were tears. Quiet ones. No dramatic sobbing. Just people dabbing at their eyes. When the officiant said we could kiss, she stepped closer and pulled me in before I had time to hesitate. It wasn't a showy kiss. Just warm and certain. At the reception, people relaxed. Coworkers who had once whispered about midlife crises clinked glasses and told us we looked good together. One neighbor who had avoided eye contact months ago hugged her and said she seemed happy. She just smiled and said she was. Later that evening, as the sun started to set over the water, we stepped outside for a moment alone. She slipped off her heels and leaned against the railing. She asked if I remembered the elevator whispers. I said I did. She shook her head slightly and said she almost let that stop her. I pointed out she didn't. She agreed. She said it was because she was tired of shrinking. I thought about the first night she knocked on my door. The urgency. The loneliness. The need to feel wanted. And now, standing beside me as my wife, there was no urgency. No proving. Just calm. I remarked that she proved them wrong. She looked at me sideways. She corrected me. We proved them wrong. Inside, music started again. Laughter. Glasses clinking. This wasn't a fairy tale. It had been messy. Complicated. Risky. But nothing about this felt reckless now. It felt earned. When we walked back inside hand in hand, I realized something simple. The people who once said it wouldn't last were still here, watching us slow dance like it was the most normal thing in the world. And maybe that was the quietest kind of victory. Not proving them wrong with arguments. Just living well enough that they stopped questioning it. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, she rested her head against my shoulder again, the same way she had that first night without secrecy. Only now, there was nothing to hide. No hallway checks. No flight schedules. No borrowed time. Just us. And this time, it wasn't escape. It was home. Sometimes I think back to that first midnight knock. If I had ignored it, my life would probably look simpler on paper. No whispers in the elevator. No tense conversations in parking garages. No long nights wondering if love was worth the mess. But it also would have been quieter in the wrong way. I used to think being steady meant staying safe. Keeping things predictable. Not stepping into complicated situations. What I learned is that safety isn't the same as fulfillment. I met her when she felt invisible. When someone had convinced her that time had reduced her value. I didn't fix that. I just refused to agree with it. And somewhere along the way, I realized I had been shrinking too. After my divorce, I told myself I was fine. Independent. Low maintenance. But the truth is, I had settled into a version of my life that required very little courage. Loving her forced me to speak up. To risk being judged. To stand next to someone who was being talked about, and not step away to protect myself. It would have been easier to keep things quiet. To let her walk back into her old life and pretend I was untouched. But comfort has a cost. What I learned is this. Age doesn't cancel desire. History doesn't obligate you to stay unhappy. And being reliable is not the same as being replaceable. She thought she was fading. I thought I was ordinary. Neither of us were right. Love didn't arrive as fireworks. It arrived as late-night conversations. As steady mornings. As small, stubborn choices. We didn't win because the world suddenly approved. We won because we stopped asking for permission. There will always be people who say it's too late. Too messy. Too risky. But sometimes the most honest thing you can do is choose the person who makes you feel fully visible and let the rest sort itself out. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening, it's this. Your story doesn't end just because someone else decides you've peaked. You don't fade because a room gets younger. And you don't have to apologize for wanting something real. One knock on a quiet door can change everything. You just have to open it.